Digital nomads visiting a place does have the economic effect of tourists. And in fact, many digital nomads' life histories goes like this, right? It's like they have like high intensity movement every couple of months, new place. For a few years, they typically discover their dream place. They meet someone, and that becomes their base in that first period. It's also just exploring, meaning figuring out what are the cities of the world like and where do I want to live. And the value that they provide is the same that a tourist does. And that's when you saw with digital nomad visas, the motivation for all the countries was like, hey, we have these people who are like tourists. In fact, they're better than tourists in some sense because on average they're a little bit higher income and they don't have any problems that like regular economic situation that regular immigration has. Like there's no concern with like competing for local jobs. So like this is an all win. And on top of that, they've seen as like, oh, they bring startups, knowledge, creativity to our little town. So that's why it motivated a lot of the countries. And I think that's all true.
This week, I'm sharing an additional part of my conversation with Sondre Rasch, who is the CEO and co-founder of SafetyWing. This was a really fun conversation. I'd highly recommend you go back and listen to the previous parts of our conversation, but you can watch this completely independently. You're going to hear us talking about the global competition for talent and why companies and countries are now having to compete, not just for talent in the physical world, but actually also for remote talent, for global talent, for digital nomads. And countries are competing to become the place that people want to go and where people want to work from, distinct from where the companies necessarily need to be, but actually being able to attract individual workers. And then we talk about the rise of so-called internet countries and what that means for the future of work. We talk about how online subcultures are kept alive thanks to platforms like Reddit. We talk about how work is becoming borderless and not just remote. And finally, we talk about the work that SafetyWing is doing in building these safety nets for remote workers, for digital workers, for digital nomads. It was a really fun conversation. I think I would highly recommend going back and listening to all the parts of this conversation, because Sondre's had a really incredible background building things, taking multiple companies through Y Combinator and applying some of the lessons he's learned from different startups along the way into the next things that he's gone on to build. You can get the full show notes, the transcript, and read my newsletter at theknowledge.io. You can find Sondre online on Twitter at @srash and SafetyWing at safetywing.com. But we'll have all the links in the show notes and the description below. And if you love this episode, please do share it with a friend. And don't forget to leave a review wherever you listen to podcasts, in particular, somewhere like Spotify or Apple Podcasts. Leave a review. Tell me what you like. Tell me what you loved. Tell me the parts of the conversation that resonated with you so that I can find other guests that you'll like and continue building a podcast that you love. Thank you for the support that helps us to do this, and I'm sure you'll love this episode. Let's talk about digital countries. I think in your business, SafetyWing, you're importing at least two little bits of Nordic essence or, some Norwegian energy here. So one is in the flat salary type structure, and another is in just the idea of having this social safety net, which is a very Nordic thing. Whenever people talk about having social safety nets, that is the case study that everyone turns to. And so these are some things that you're bringing. But and I'll let you talk a lot more about the mission and everything that you're building, but just to connect this to the previous conversation that we were having, I'm interested to know, as the world becomes a lot more global and we become a lot more hyper online, there is a lot of blending of social references, and like online culture kind of becomes its own thing, which sits on top of local culture. So you have things that might be locally relevant to people that are in San Francisco, people in India, people in Nigeria, people wherever else in the world. But then online culture is like a layer on top of that, which is shared and universal. And I wonder if you think there is an extent to which you could end up losing, if we end up having these digital countries where everyone's hyper online, Twitter is actually text, right? iMessage becomes the online version that is universally transmissible. Do you end up losing some local culture? And the idea that because they are somewhere particular in the world, can export like something, when we say Nordic culture, that it's inherent to that region of the world because loads of people have been living in that area, developing coders and rituals and ideas and philosophies that are localized. And that is part of what makes them so robust. if we were all moving around very quickly, being nomads or just being hyper online, do you think we end up losing some of the localized culture that gets refined by virtue of being in a particular place?
No, definitely. I think it's a complete massacre in some sense. Like it's really, really powerful. So yeah, we're definitely in that process of the global culture interacting with the local culture. And when that happens, the local culture in a way, it's like a protected market of ideas and customs and norms and phrases. So as the kind of global come in, they're like hyper potent, right? But then of course it's also a discovery mechanism, right? So it's like that will happen. And then as there's some new, let's say, village coming online, maybe they'll have some idea that actually just goes global, right? And then becomes kind of into the universal culture. So that definitely happens. So you very much see it now with like so many Indians coming online that like a lot of Indian origin memes, to some degree, also see it with Nigeria, although that's earlier in the process, but you can definitely see that. And so there is this, global knowledge creation happening there, which is good. I do think that there is a loss, right? That's the subculture point, right? There is this benefit to the subculture, but I don't think we can go back, right? So we can't go back to unplugging. We need to go forward. And now that I'm thinking of that through, that sounds like a terrible idea, but it's kind of, how do you make create the possibility for enduring subcultures or even localized ones in the future? I think it's like first starts with like appreciating it. And then there's also, I think, some technical solutions. And then I think you will start, once you kind of pass that barrier, you will actually get a reinforcement mechanism the other way potentially. So that can go like this. Right now, massive flattening across the world of all knowledge. And then we will reach this kind of peak point, and then people will be like, oh, this flat, bland, universal culture, that's boring. And then they will kind of recede back to the unique. The digital nomad phenomenon will cause people to be able to move. So you will have people moving where they want to live, right? So much more voluntary movement. And that will cause the sort of city's competitive advantage to be much more enhanced. So you already have this phenomenon here in the Bay Area in a big way, which is a place of immigrants mostly, right? So it's like people are here by choice. And it's a very, yeah, some of it is from opportunity, but a big part of it is values. So what happens then is that over time, actually, Bay Area becomes more Bay Area-like through selection. And I think a similar thing will happen globally. And then you might start to get local expression getting reinforced, potentially. Another thing you can do is the technical solution. So here, the only place I've seen successfully maintain subcultures is Reddit. I don't know anywhere else. Everywhere else, every other platform is flattens subcultures. Yeah, there are filter bubbles on Twitter or whatever. Like there are clusters. I'm not saying that, but they interact with each other and flatten each other. But on Reddit, you do actually have real subculture formations that can be like, so, if you drag it out a few years, they have like their own vocabulary. It's like rich. It's like rich subculture of, I don't know, Lord of the Rings memes or whatever. Yeah, so I think that there is still more of those kind of platforms to be built, and that you will also have moral communities emerge, and maybe the filter bubbles will be even stronger, and you will have a bit of a branching out, or platforms will be built that allow for it. That essentially, like, imagine just Reddit, but without the are all or are popular. It's just the communities. And you can take that even further than that. I think that there's probably more to be built here. And that once we've kind of gone through, first, everyone just wants to get global. They want to get smart and they want to get like, rich and successful. But once they've kind of gotten there, then I think they will return. Then they want to be unique. They want to find their value preferences, and they want to build a home and all of those things. I mean, you see it so clearly with the digital nomads, which is the world I live in, which is that first is this like dream of escape from this, like, I had it myself, like living in this, somewhat nice life, but like kind of like a boring job, boring place, spending all my money on rent situation. And then I hear about the digital nomad possibility. Oh, I can escape from all of this, get out, and then it's this new identity, and I meet other digital nomads. It's this global community. It's amazing and it's so attractive. And then at some point, a few years in, once you fully realize that, then it's like, well, how are we going to connect now, right? How are we going to then build a community soul loneliness, etc. So I think that the digital nomads are ahead of the curve here, but I think a lot of people are gonna get to that place. So yeah, that's my 2 cents. That's my 10 cents on that.
No, I love that. I think what you were just saying is making me rethink some beliefs that I had, and that's always a good sign. And I think a few times this year, there's been a few things. AI is another one of them. My conversation with Robin Hanson, there was a few things that came up where I'm just being forced to reconsider the extent to which I see certain things as special and things that are sacred to you, and they have inherent importance because of that. And, as an example, we think of culture as special, localized culture. And I greatly value localized culture. I value my, cultural heritage and all of these things. And it's interesting to potentially envisage a world where, simply because of the depth of the shared lore of people that are in the same online spaces, whether they are deep subcultures or even the extent to which some of them are flattened out, but using Reddit as an example, where like the people that are in those subreddits that have been there for years, there's shared lore, there's history that they remember, there are memes that are callbacks to previous memes, and you see a lot of that online, right? There's lore of the internet. And as it continues to develop, a lot of ideas become entrenched and they become very strong internet ideas. And a lot of these things kind of intertwine in the same way that they do in real life. And in real life, in certain cultures, in certain areas of the world, just in the same way as you might say in certain areas of the internet, there are ideas that kind of harken back to previous ideas. And if you were in that area for long enough, you will understand the significance of that thing. And if you have a certain tribe, whether it's online or offline, you'll have certain belief systems that you share, certain jokes that you share, and so it's this idea that maybe there is a point at which your offline culture might be less relevant and you might care about it a lot less if you can really find like a online subculture that you can be part of, or an online group, or a digital country, and a place that you can share with others, that you have shared lore and you have a shared connection and it feels like home. And you develop a lot of the same perhaps cultural characteristics that we currently have in the offline world. And yeah, I wonder what the future version of that world looks like. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that and how that interfaces with what you're building.
No, for sure. It does. It does. And I don't think we've fully solved or realized it yet, but we know we want to. Certainly, I think that for digital nomads, yes, the offering the social safety net is a useful product. Offering the kind of global passport is a useful tool, but it is definitely also necessary to have like the identity and community that comes with that be well developed. It's very easy to build on top of the digital nomad because it is already a community that has a lot of values and natural things built in. And I think it's lovely. I mean, they're obviously explorers. I am a bit agnostic, and on purpose. So, like, I don't want to fill it with too much meaning. I do think that it is important to develop this sort of digital nomad citizen into like a really good pro-social entity in the future. But I also sort of want to hold back to see what it is. It's part discovery and part aspiration in terms of how we are going about that discovery. And I would say, in SafetyWing, I really believe in this idea that kind of art precedes ideas. And when we started SafetyWing, one of the first thing we did was that we draw a lot of these bird art, which looks kind of strange. Now it looks less strange, actually. But when we made it, it looked really strange. So it was a designer several years in who commented like, oh, these birds live in the world we're trying to make. And I think that's really accurate. So you have then there's two types. One is this like digital nomad bird. They're in this like colorful world and they're traveling, they're exploring, they're on an adventure. And then the other one is their sort of remote health aesthetic, which is this sort of retro futuristic bird. And this came about not intentionally, by the way. This is like something we discovered looking back, which I also love this idea. It's like retrofuturism is this idea of like remembering the future, right? It's like in the 60s, what does the future look like? And I think it has been at least such an important thing for our time because people forgot about the future a little bit. And so that's the sort of spirit of early science in our community is the adventure, and it is I would say also the authenticity and optimism of like remembering the future. And yeah, so these are some early signs I'm seeing. I'm super curious how this will play out. I'm like pretty sure I think SafetyWing will be the one to do it, but like I'm sure that the era of internet countries is coming, and that they will develop in a very interesting way, and that in the future there will be these overlapping internet countries, and they will be types in a way that you might interact with. I hope they will be like really good and interesting. I'm a bit with you in the sense of just observing to see where it's going.
I think people will want to move to internet countries for probably between shared ideals and shared benefits. And I would love to know what you think of as the future of the digital nomad space and this idea. Particularly, I'm thinking about where we are now and some of what the intersections are in how we're progressing, both from a remote work perspective, also from an AI perspective. And I'll ask you some more questions about that. When you think about the trend of what it looks like to move around the world, a lot of people can look at digital nomads and think this is some new thing, it's a weird thing, what's happening here? Why are people doing that? Why would people ever end up moving to a digital country? And a lot of it, I think, makes sense on the surface. People have always moved around for opportunity. People have always aggregated around economic value. Back in the olden days, land had the inherent value, and you move to where the land has value, either because of natural resources or just because of, Rome already had roads and it already had a lot of infrastructure. And London has infrastructure, New York has infrastructure. And so there are these places around the world that people have moved to and aggregated around in these big cities because they have resources and they have wealth. And I'm interested in this idea that, okay, so in the old paradigm, the land had the wealth. And so that's where people went. The land had the value. And so people have to go there. And then I guess maybe, and that's kind of like the manufacturing paradigm. And then you move from there to maybe like the technological paradigm where actually the people have the value and they can take it with them, actually. And so if I decide to build my business in Silicon Valley, Silicon Valley will reap some of the benefits of that. The land benefits from the people that go there. And maybe that's kind of the world where more so in now, I think, where countries around the world are starting to compete over the intellectual capital that they can get to come to where they are in the world and come build your company here. I think it's Lithuania that's been great at this. There's a few countries in Europe that's been great at this, and also around the world, obviously Ireland and some places in the EU, Portugal, but then also in the US, Canada just had these new visas that they're rolling out. And so there's this idea that, okay, in this maybe technological paradigm, we want people that have the value to come here and build your thing here. But I wonder what the next version of that looks like when, okay, so the first one was land has the value, people go to the land. The second one was the people have the value. And so almost the land goes to the people. But when I think of digital nomad culture, if everyone can be anywhere, nobody needs to be in the same place. And you could build a business where everyone is in a different place for different reasons. And so actually, this is now peer to peer, it's people to people. And really, it's not so much about the land. People make their own individual decisions about the land. We are not all going to go and build our company in Silicon Valley. So none of those previous factors are interplay in the same way. So I'd love to know, I guess, what you think of from a futuristic and idealistic perspective, and also from an economic perspective about how that starts to change what migration patterns look like, what economic patterns look like as people and money move around the world. Hey, we'll get back to the episode in just one moment, but I wanted to tell you very quickly about my newsletter. I started sharing everything I was learning online, and a few thousand people came along for the ride. I send 3 regular emails. Brainwave fortnightly on a Tuesday, which is about the intersection between technology, philosophy, and psychology. Then every week on a Thursday, I send Revelations, and that's about creativity and productivity. And then finally, every other weekend, I send Wayfinder, and that's about decision making. So people in the audience actually send me really tough problems that they're working through, and I help to deconstruct them using mental models and decision-making frameworks. So if you'd like to subscribe, you can join me and over 20,000 incredibly driven people at theknowledge.io. Okay, back to the episode.
I love the question. I think it is like really important actually for us to know. So I'm really glad you asked me that. Like my first intuition was something access. That seems to be organized in some particular way, like having access to things. And there is this feedback loop phenomenon, which I agree with you. You also have with the land where the people go there makes the land more valuable, which makes more people want to go there and increase the value of and that on the internet, that's the sort of network effect. So that would be my first past the post, but I'm going to think about this one. I suspect there might be more to it.
Sure. One thing I might add to it that might help to flesh it out is just, for example, some of the complaints that some people may have about digital nomads is, okay, so we talked about how in the past people would aggregate around land. And okay, this land has these properties. Maybe they have natural resources, maybe they have infrastructure, there is something inherently there. And you move there for the resources. Criticism some people could have about digital nomads is that now when they move to a place, they take the value with them because they have their own economic value. What should be happening perhaps in the slightly previous paradigm, the economic paradigm is, if I was a business, I'm planting my business in your land, in your territory. And so because I'm here, I'm benefiting the people around me. So I'm benefiting the local area because I'm going to spend money here. I might have to hire jobs. I'm bringing jobs here, all of these things. So the area is benefiting economically from my presence there. But then in the new paradigm, so instead of people going to, let's say, London, New York, Paris, some of these places in the world, people are now going to the digital economic capitals like Bali and Tulum and Krakow. When people go there as digital nomads, if they are just a contractor or something like that, they're not building a physical business there, they bring and take the economic value. And so it doesn't necessarily stay in the land, and people might say it doesn't benefit the locality in the same way. And that's an argument. So I'm not necessarily saying that. That's just something that people could say. So I'd love to know, is that something that you think about, how that aspect of things changes the way that we build societies as well?
Well, so as I think it can be to an extent, but I don't think it's as kind of logically determined as the thought might imply, because digital nomads visiting a place does have the economic effect of tourists. And in fact, many digital nomads' life histories goes like this, right? It's like they start digital nomad, they have like high intensity movement every couple of months, new place. For a few years, they typically discover their dream place. They meet someone, and that becomes their base. But then they do travel a lot, right? Then they might go to Bali 3 months, for the summer because they can, but they have a base. So in a way, what they're doing is in that first period, it's also just exploring, meaning figuring out what are the cities of the world like and where do I want to live. And the value that they provide is the same that a tourist does. And that's when you saw with digital nomad visas, the motivation for all the countries was like, hey, we have these people who are like tourists. In fact, they're better than tourists in some sense, because on average they're a little bit higher income and they don't have any problems that like regular economic situation that regular immigration has. Like there's no concern with like competing for local jobs. They have internet income. So like this is an all win. And on top of that, they've seen as like, oh, they bring startups, knowledge, creativity to our little town. So that's why it motivated a lot of the countries. And I think that's all true. Okay, so that's just a logical, like that's a qualification. With that said, though, I do think that there can be more or less pro-social behavior from digital nomads. I would love to see more, a little bit. I would like that to be developed a bit, especially in SafetyWing. We have toyed with this several times. We've never really fully grasped it. But what you would love to see, especially if that community becomes larger and larger, is that you want it to be kind of known to be like incredibly pro-social, where like people are so grateful there are these digital nomads in town who are, I don't know, like renovating the local co-working space and like, I don't know, contributing to the community that they're at, right? If they do that, if people go around and they're helping out like you would in a normal community, then I think that will make it the reputation for nomads much better long term. So I hope to see that, but I don't know exactly how to make it happen though.
Where do you see, you talked before about turning your ambition up to 11. So when you think of maybe both SafetyWing and Plumia turned up to 11 in the far future vision of what these businesses could look like, you mentioned before this idea of, okay, maybe this looks like access when you think of the future of how people move around the world. Where do you see SafetyWing or Plumia in that stack? Where I think the way I might conceptualize it is, okay, you start at the product stack, which is fine. Wherever you are in the world, you have access to these products, and we can give you some health, we can give you some insurance, we can give you access to doctors, things like that. Maybe the layer above that is kind of almost like a digital union kind of thing, like an internet union. A union in the offline world, you pay your union dues and you get access to like a raft of benefits and some shared access to, things on an equal level. we may already have some contracting arrangements. We might already have, there's a raft of things you can immediately buy into. We've already arranged this health insurance. And so you're just going to buy into and get this raft of things just by paying your monthly dues. Yeah. So there's that. And then maybe, I guess, the layer above that is, I don't know, maybe you think of something like digital timeshares in a way, where it's like, actually, not only do we have that, and actually, I think this ties to some of Balaji's ideas where he imagines people congregating around the world in physical spaces and owning compounds where people like them, people that are bought into their, digital country or whatever, can all live in the same place. And maybe you have places around the world that are kind of shared by this community of people that are, they're paying their dues, they're getting their shared benefits, and now they are sharing both space and ideology. And so now actually you can move around the world and stay in particular places. So feel free to expand on that as much as you like, but I'd love to know, yeah, where do you see that going?
Yeah, as another interesting door you open up, I haven't thought that much about, but I can totally see that happening, and even likely so. So you definitely see that already that you mentioned with physical spaces in a huge way. I'm shocked actually how much of a wave this is, and I love this about our time. It's one of the most interesting things to have these new cities being built, and a lot of them are thinking about remote worker, digital nomads as they're doing that. New cities, new towns, new ways of living. And I can absolutely see, and to some degree already are, but especially if we fully realize, then we have the passport and the social safety net, and we're able to do that in a way that is pretty unified and value aligned, and that you can tell a lot about the people who are there by them being member, that will start this kind of clustering where the kind of people that will want those kind of people to attend will grant access to that. And there will be this kind of mutual benefit from that as that kind of ecosystem grows. I do suspect that will likely be the case in the future. Now I think about it, that has actually a dark side to it too. So I have to think a bit more about how to make sure that that's good. But I do think it's likely to be the case that the digital communities will cluster to the point where they become very distinct, perhaps in the form of like internet country, and will start to build, or the ecosystem will start to build spaces for people like that. And then you get these spaces that are for certain members, and then another internet country have other spaces. It will still be pretty nice though, because it will look more like products than countries. We say country and we think country, which is very forceful, but of course they're going to be voluntary to join or leave. So it's going to look more like products. So it's going to seem kind of nice. Like you choose the one that best fits your values and preferences.
So you're kind of subscribing to, yeah, kind of like what we discussed. You're subscribing for however long to a range of things that you get. So access to a variety of, okay, here is maybe some labor requirements. Here are some benefits that you might have access to, and you could move perhaps also some ideology. So I know there are some hot button political topics, and perhaps there's an interesting thing where, for example, I'm thinking about the abortion situation in the US, where in different states, different states take different opinions, and perhaps there is a world in which having a certain digital passport allows you to go to certain areas of the world that align with whatever beliefs that you have, and you can still access whatever you need as you move around. I'd love to know, and I know this is one of my last questions now, but from the experience that you guys have already had building SafetyWing and thinking about, okay, how you employ people, I've heard that you have this flat salary structure where people get paid the same. If that's the case, I'd love to know how you thought about that, but also how you might continue to think about that as the nature of the way that works potentially changes. Because, for example, the idea of being a digital nomad, I think, has already changed what work might look like for a lot of people. So maybe the first step is remote work, being able to work from home, and then being able to work from anywhere in the world. And then there's also some of these far further flung ideas like Replit, where actually work could actually be fractionalized. And maybe a step beyond that is that not only is it fractionalized, where maybe you're only working a certain number of days per week, for example, actually you're just working on a bounty. And this job is now split into 12 joblets of, micro jobs. And actually each day you might just auction for however many hours you want to work. that is the number of micro jobs that you could do. And you could just do little sections of lots of different jobs for potentially even lots of different employers. So I'd love to know, I don't know, if you have any thoughts on how the future of work could look, and then also how that relates to compensation and things like that.
This last one is something that I've lived the different ideas and lived and failed and succeeded. So this is one where I have really thought about it and played out the different options. I believe both of them are correct. So this like atomization of work is happening, and I think it's a good thing, meaning that for certain kind of person, it can be very freedom optimizing, and especially if you have like another creative project, I think those kinds of jobs can be incredibly conducive to that. And working also on like this precise thing you're excited about. It takes a while to kind of build up a freelance job career, I should say. It's not easy, but I started out doing that, and it has that upside. When I built Superside, in the beginning, the idea was like the whole company works like that. We would have these microservices internally instead of full-time employees. And then, of course, the product itself are these like teams of freelancers doing projects for companies. So I believed in that super strongly. However, I did notice a gap after a while. And the gap is something like dedication/responsibility for a certain outcome. So you can call that a service, but it just doesn't work as well. So in SafetyWing, we split this up. So we have two types of people. We have essentially salaried people, or like you said, they have the same salary. They have full freedom in the sense that we don't know, obviously there's no working hours, nobody's tracking anywhere, but you're responsible for something. And then we have freelancers. And freelancers, they're doing some specific input, right? So that could be like doing tickets, customer service tickets, or another thing. So we have both, or they can do something hourly. And different people prefer different things. And I think SafetyWing is like 50-50. And that's in total numbers. We probably split a bit towards the salaried and total compensation. But yeah, and then why flat salary? I think there is some like just Norwegian history there that just seemed intuitive at the time. Why are we sticking with it? I mean, I have to defend this policy so much. I should say that I do really believe that it's right not to have geographically based salaries. That I think is just correct. And anyone who does, they're shooting themselves in the foot, because if you hire if you're like Silicon Valley company and you hire a developer from Bosnia and then you pay them Bosnia market salary, guess what? They will pretty soon learn that once they have your company on the resume, they can apply to another internet company. They're not in the Bosnian labor market anymore. That's a mistake. Maybe like you can fool them for a little while, but they're gonna get it. So that's the question of which labor market are you in? A market is the buyers and sellers in a particular market. So if you can apply to any job for an internet company, that's the market you're in. Yeah. So anyway, so that I think is just correct. When it comes to just totally flat, meaning not by seniority or even type of position in the company, that is like, I can't defend that in the same way. I can't say that that's just right. I will say that it's really nice and it's like very aesthetically pleasant. And I do think that there is some justification to it, because the opposite argument for fairness might be like, well, you got to pay people what they contribute. Yes, but as long as like it is a very functioning culture and company, everyone is contributing, and it's kind of hard to say actually, especially when there's responsibilities involved, who is contributing how much. And it tends anyway to be that you're paid the average of the productivity in that company. So you might as well just take that logic to the extreme and just say that, no, here's the job. The job is having a responsibility in this company. We all have an equal share of that. It works really well. It has some great upsides. People stop totally thinking about salary. It's not transparency, which is, by the way, a bit of a fad word, but it's simplicity, which is even greater. Like, you don't have to be transparent because there's one rule for everybody. And you're really tied to the mast, so you avoid like a whole host of like negative equilibrium that you can end in by being flexible and negotiating salary. Everyone knows this. There are other tools to minimize it a little bit, like salary bands. But essentially, you pay more money to the people who are good at negotiating. And that's not necessarily fair. Because it's so hard to defend and hard to hold, it also becomes a really strong signal, I think, that as long as we're doing this, SafetyWing is for real, right? So I think it's also like a signal that we still have integrity. We haven't been kind of hollowed out entirely by corporate pressures yet. Still hanging in there.
Okay, I think the last question that I'll ask you, maybe connects to something we were talking about earlier, which is just the effective altruism angle and accelerationism, etc., and how some of that interfaces with, this idea of the future of work, digital nomadism, etc. And it's a really simple question. I'd just love to know how you think AI can affect or interface with this idea of, I think there's a conceptualization of what it means to be a digital nomad, which is to a certain extent, your life is kind of in your hands. You decide where to live, you decide how to work, you have a lot of autonomy and control. And there is one version of what it looks like for that kind of person to work with AI, where actually it is more autonomy for the individual. And in fact, AI becomes a superpower for the individual person. They can do work 10 times faster. They don't have to spend any time doing slack work or, just organizing their ideas. They get to do what they are very best at. And actually, this is a force multiplier for every single person within an organization. It makes them a lot better, and the organization benefits from it. And that's a win win. The other version that some people may take within a working context is that actually, because of the way some of these data models work, all the power that AI could bring could just be aggregated right at the top by the corporation at the corporation level rather than at an individual level. And what that means is actually, if you had some people doing some rote or repetitive work, maybe you don't need those people to do that or anything at all. If they didn't have much skill set beyond that to be able to apply that in a creative way, then a lot of people and some people in Silicon Valley already have been excited about this, the potential that you could run much leaner companies. And actually, you don't need to have 10 engineers. You could just have two that are really good and know how to use AI, and they could do the work of 10 people. And actually, you don't even need to hire the rest of the people in the first place. So I'd love to know what you think about that. Is this something that gives people more autonomy, where they're able to have even more freedom and be far more effective on the whole? Or is it something that potentially could just be aggregated at a higher level and companies maybe become smaller and leaner, and it changes the way that people work with each other and work with businesses?
So it is a little bit all of the above. It's really hard to model. I struggle as I try to answer the question. In terms of but okay, here's one approach. What is AI? What is AGI? What will it be? I think that the model I would have the highest confidence on is Kevin Kelly. So Kevin Kelly wrote this book called The Inevitable in 2012. There's a chapter there on AI, and he describes how that's going to play out. And I think he's the most right. Everyone has good insights to it. And his kind of point is just look, people aren't intelligent. Intelligence is like a thing that people have. It's not the essence. And I think he's right about that, actually, which is very counterintuitive because we connect those stuff like intelligence, consciousness, and personhood. We often think of that as just one blob. But if you think of intelligence as something you can extract out, then the way this plays out looks much more like AWS than anything else, which he predicts in that. It says that there's going to be a layer of intelligence, artificial intelligence, on top of everything, similar to how you might see there's a layer of compute or software now on top of almost everything. And so far, I would say that's how it looks like. That's what it looks like it's playing out. There's a layer of AI on top of everything, and that becomes agency enhancing for the right person. Although the reason I'm struggling to think about it is that there is this odd feedback loop happening as well, where you can definitely see a situation where you get dependency and therefore loss of agency. And I have no idea what this thing is, right? Because you're interacting with the crowd or the kind of sum of knowledge in some weird way. If you're dependent on that, the temptation to be lazy and just lean on the crowd will be just stronger and stronger and stronger with the AI. So yeah, I think if you're really disciplined and able to retain your thought and you kind of keep exercising your mind and will and maybe even body, then I think the AI tool can be massively autonomy enhancing, and that might be a great thing. And the EA approach to this, that goes something like, and because I'm in this community, I've had this conversation many times. I'm aware of the counter argument and the argument and the counter argument. And as you might know, they would say, well, you have this goal oriented thing and they can do things. And so super intelligence, I think, is just debunked by the fact that computation is constrained. The Nick Bostrom's book. Now I'm just commenting on EA and AI. Okay. Superintelligence, that's not right because there's no constraint on computation. Essentially, that once the software can improve itself, it will go exponential. Okay. And that's why you can overnight get Yeah. But that doesn't look like what's happening. It looks like it's constrained by computation, which I think is accurate. So you're not going to have intelligence explosion. And then the second point is, well, even without an intelligence explosion, you can still have these a bit more slowly, let's say on a kind of Kurzweilian timeline, whatever it is, 2040 for a computer to have the computation of all of mankind or something, which is still pretty soon, that they will have a goal and they will override, like the goal will be accidentally have some side effect and then, will ruin the world. More plausible. However, I like the sort of David Deutsch approach to this, which is that you solve the problems you have in front of you, which sounds kind of naive, but when you're engaging to kind of solve problem you don't have in front of you, it's very easy to fall into what David Deutsch calls prophecy, when quickly can become a self-fulfilling prophecy. It's a bit of a waste of time because the future depends on the knowledge that is created, and you can't predict what knowledge will be created. You're not solving a real problem when you do that. So it's much better to just solve problems, and all problems are solvable. So I'm sure that when we get to that point, we will solve the problems that are right in front of us and retain the positive upside. I don't think it's guaranteed though. So I'm optimistic in the sense that I think that the problems can be solved. But sure, we can blow ourselves up. I mean, that's definitely on the menu as well.
Fair. I love that. I think that was the perfect response and also the perfect point to end. So thank you so much for your time. This has been a really engaging conversation. I've really enjoyed it.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for tuning in. Please do stay tuned for more. Don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe. It really helps the podcast. And follow me on Twitter. Feel free to shoot me any thoughts. See you next time.